I have won the lottery. But before you stop me outside and ask me to pay off your mortgage, I don't mean that lottery. I have won the lottery of life. I'm white, I'm mostly able-bodied, I'm not living in poverty, and the bonus ball is I'm a man. And I did check that this morning before I came out. I'm a man living in a man-shaped world, and by all accounts, I should be absolutely crushing it. But I'm not. I often feel disconnected, I struggle with my emotions, I feel lost. And standing up here in front of all of you saying that feels a little bit disingenuous, because there's been so many good things which have happened over the years to support women and other genders. And for me to stand up here and take up that space, I feel a little bit self-conscious. But I know that it's important to talk about these things. 4 or 5 years ago, we all went through a thing called the lockdown. And that was a time where we had communities which were coming together, we had relationships which were really meshing together nicely, but we also had things which were pulled apart. I found myself going through a separation at that time. I was married for 15 years, 3 gorgeous children, I'd been running my own business for 10 years, and I just started a new business. Up until that point, I knew exactly what my role was in life, until I didn't. The thing is that men now have standards which are really hard to balance. On one hand, we have to be these strong individuals, and on the other hand, we have to be really emotionally intelligent and match everything in the middle. But when everything was reset for me, like somebody had come and found that little switch on the back of my neck, or that weird SIM tool which you can never find for your phone, popped it in there, I reset back to basic masculine standards. Don't ask for help, always be strong, be individual. And that would have been really useful 50 years ago. And I remember my mom and dad talking about this. They used to share about how back in their days, life was so much better. Everyone was friendlier. We had communities. People didn't just think about themselves. And you could leave your front door open because no one was going to steal your 55-inch telly. But now it is totally different. And we know men and women seek out help in different ways. Men, they look for very practical ways. Women tend to deal more with emotional stuff. If you want to have a conversation about the different engines in a 2000-era Honda Civic, come on, let's do it. You want to talk about emotions? Not a chance. I know what it's like to be me, and for all of you, that's all we ever truly, really know is what our experience is. But I know when I start to talk about the struggles which I have, of feeling lost, of feeling disconnected, and then I widen my gaze more to the men around me in my community, I hear the same things. I hear those shared messages. I hear them talking about the same subjects. And when we widen it even further, we start to get to the statistics. And probably the most shocking for me is that 3/4 of completed suicides are male. If we're looking for equity and equality, I don't think we're looking for anything in that statistic to change that. But we know that things aren't going to change until we do something about it. The clues often start in the language that men use, the words which they come out with. And what's really interesting is there was a piece of research in Australia by Professor Fiona Shand who interviewed men who had attempted but thankfully hadn't completed suicide. And she asked them to use words to describe their experience. They had words like hopeless, useless, worthless. I know those are all words which I've used to describe me and my place. I know that those are words which the men around me have used. But then she went to ask them another question afterwards, and she said, what was it which stopped you from completing that suicide? And pretty much all of them came back and said the same thing. I do not want to be a burden on the people I leave behind. The communities which we have should be able to help men to be seen, heard, and validated. In fact, that's what we all want. But at the moment, we're not able to do that. And so men go out and seek communities which will do that for them. Often they're online. Often they're full of toxic masculinity and misogyny. But while they say the things that men want to hear to help them feel seen, heard, and validated, they're always going to persist. We need to change that story. Men often open up only when the fear of being vulnerable is much lower than the thing they've experienced. Now, you might be thinking, well, Dave, why are you talking about this stuff? Well, I'm one of those people who's had some experiences which are much bigger than my fear of being vulnerable. And I want to share that story with you today. I want to take you back to 1988. Looking around the audience, some of you were definitely there. And I'm in my mom's kitchen. My mom's kitchen is exactly what you would expect in a 1980s kitchen. It's beige, it's boring, but she creates the most beautiful Sunday roasts. And after me and my dad have had this big feed of that, we argue over who's going to do the washing up. Because we all know what it's like to not have a dishwasher. And we all know that the washing up is a much better place to be than the drying up because you end up with a really wet tea towel. On that morning in 1988, I'm sat in my mum's kitchen. I'm having a haircut, which for some of you might be hard to imagine. And Jennifer, our hairdresser, and I call her Jennifer because that's her name, she's trying to get this mop of hair to stand up straight and spike, like all of us wanted back in the 1980s. And after 5 minutes, she gives up and just stops. And then as she finishes, she does that thing which I remember across tens of years. She leans forward and she blows on my neck. Oh, why don't hairdressers do that anymore? She then brushes me off, takes the shawl off me, and I stand up. And I walk out into the garden, and I hear a noise. And then I notice a helicopter going round and round over our small village. I grew up in a very nice village in North Worcestershire called Hagley. Population then of 7,500. That helicopter was out looking for someone. Stuart Goff, a schoolboy in the same year as me at school, and a paper boy at the same news agents as me, had gone out that morning to do his paper round, as he did every morning. But he hadn't returned home. The helicopter was out searching for him. And it was 2 weeks before we found out what had happened. Stuart had sadly been abducted that morning, and then in those 2 weeks he'd been murdered. How do you process something like that? In our village, parents knew parents, children knew children, everyone knew the local policeman. It was a very tight-knit community where one thing changed everything. In that moment, it took all of the children in our year at school from being children to adults in one hit. And the universe didn't even say sorry. Back then, we didn't know about PTSD. We didn't know about trauma. It was almost as if it hadn't been invented yet. So we all found our own ways of dealing with it. I picked anger, a nice, easy emotion to access, and that became the emotion which I took all the way through my adult life. Like a beautiful jacket just out of reach. I could just lean over and just grab it and put it on. Totally unfashionable, but it fitted perfectly. And that was the emotion which I interacted with everything throughout those years. Every trip to university and college, most of them failed, I'll hasten to add. Every job, every relationship, into my marriage and the birth of my 3 gorgeous children, it was always there in the background. On the surface, you'd get this very happy, jovial person. Underneath, a total mess, anxious all the time. The pattern was really simple. I would lose my temper over the silliest things. I'd rage, I'd break things, I'd shout. And then I'd withdraw. So scared of it happening again, disassociating from my emotions, scared that I was going to shout at someone else. And then I would emerge, days, maybe even weeks later, like this happy butterfly, and everything would be okay. I have an amazing family. I have fantastic friends. And they gave me this space to experience all of that, which is both a blessing and a curse. Because while they give you the space to experience it, no one ever calls you out on it. And so you believe that that behavior is absolutely okay. And that carried on until 2015. In 2015, everything changed. My ex-wife decided she'd had enough. She'd had enough of me breaking things. She'd had enough of me scaring the kids. She'd had enough of trying to tell the kids that, yeah, Daddy's just going through something, it's okay. And she told me to get out of the house. As you can imagine, I didn't. Because everything had been okay before, so why wasn't it going to be okay in the future? We dealt with this, everything was going to be all right. And then she did the bravest thing I think I've seen anyone ever do. She gathered up the kids under one arm, she gathered up the dog, and she walked out the door. And as that door slammed shut, the house went silent. And I did the only thing that I could think to do. I climbed up the stairs, I opened up the loft hatch, I climbed into the loft, and I started to sort out the recycling. Don't ask me why the recycling's in the loft. I still don't understand that to this day. But for the next hour, I sorted out glass and plastic, cards and paper into boxes until there was a knock at the door. And when I came back down from the loft and down the stairs, there was my dad. My dad's like a knight in shining armor. He's always been there for me. And he said some very simple words. He said, your family are safe, but you need to leave. So of course, I packed the car up with a few things and drove off angrily. I was out the house for 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, I decided I was going to change my relationship with anger. I was going to find ways to not let that anger rule me. And I would love to tell you in the time we have left all the things which I did. But I'm going to focus on a very simple practice, and that is mindfulness and meditation. Mindfulness and meditation gave me this ability to see the gap between the stimulus and the response, and to be able to climb into this gap and just widen it open, even for a big bloke like me. It changed absolutely everything. It changed the course of my relationships, it changed the course of my career, and in 2022, I decided I was going to study it a little bit more. So I did a postgraduate certificate in mindfulness studies, which is not anything that I would expect a bloke from Birmingham to ever say. And it was during that time that I had 2 very cool people close to me ask me a nice question. So Gary and Sarah Jones run a yoga studio in Bromsgrove in North Worcestershire. And they approached me and asked if I would come and run a men's meditation session. As you can imagine, if you go to a yoga studio, there's a very particular gender which goes there, mostly female. But they noticed that men were struggling, and Gary had talked very openly about his mental health struggles, which helped a lot of people around him. And when they asked me, I said yes, because if I'd have said no, this would be a very short talk. And so on International Men's Day of 2022, I sat in a room with 14 other men. We sat with the boys, and I ran our first meditation session. And yes, I wish I had the trademark to that name, but they still do. That session, I was nervous. I was worried they were going to see me as an imposter. I was worried they were going to go, you've only got a postgraduate certificate, mate. What do you know? I was worried they were going to see through the fact that for me, mindfulness and meditation had been a very good research subject of one. I know the research is there. I know what works for me. I didn't know whether it could help other people. And in that first session, we sat there. I told them a few Buddhist stories. I talked about my journey. We shared some practices, and then we meditated together. The ripple effects from sitting on that mat and as it moved out into the world around are immense. Of course, we always ask them how they came to spend time with us. And as you can imagine, about 99% of them say, my wife booked it for me. But regardless of how they got there, it's such an honor to be in that space with them. They call me the big guy at the front. And being able to sit with the boys is just one of the most wonderful things. Almost 2.5 years later, we're still doing this monthly. And what I'd love to tell you that it's something which is tens of thousands of people are doing, it's not. At the moment, it's a small group of men who are getting together and changing their experience. We know that bamboo grows very quickly, but we also know it has a period where it has to be looked after beforehand. We always ask the men what it is they get from being with us. And they talk about a safe space. They talk about being able to open up about what's important to them in a non-judgmental way. We had one guy who was telling us about the dreams he was having around his PTSD and how after a year of meditation, they settled to the point where he could really get on with life. And then we've got Dave, whose golf handicap improved by 4 shots, which for the golfers in the room, I'm told, is a good thing. But when we asked them to widen it a little bit more and look at how the relationships were with the people around them, they talked about being able to communicate better. They talked about being able to read the words between the words and getting curious about what was going on for other people, not accepting that first answer of how you're doing, but asking it again. And they were starting to empower people in their workplaces to go and do things like mental health first aid and get really close to their own mental health. One bloke in front of 14 others sat on some mats in a yoga studio with a ripple effect which goes out and out and out. We know that we need to do something with our communities. We know that we need to help men. We know that we need to stop them moving into places which are not good for them. And over the last 15 minutes or so, I have spoken to you about community from 3 different places. I've talked to you about how men are seeking out communities which are not helpful for them and how we've moved more towards individualism. I've told you a story about a community where one incident changed everything forever. And I've talked about a small community of men sitting on mats in a yoga studio and how it's positively changing them. Our communities change us, but we can change our communities as well. One of my mindfulness teachers, Choden, he has a great phrase when he talks about the fact that there's so many things in life which happen to us which aren't our fault. And he says that it's not our fault that the lightning struck the roof of our house, but it is our responsibility to fix it. And as I leave you today, I have a couple of invitations for you. The first one is, how can you help to fix the roof of our house? And how are you going to use community to help you and help the people around you? Thank you.